And it is a real pleasure to welcome you to the table, sir. Good morning.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So South Carolina is the focal point. We've had the Democratic chairwoman on. We've had the Republican chairman on to talk about the state of the race today. What is your sense, particularly with respect to the efforts that Republicans are making to move Democrats towards Donald Trump? And one way to do that is, given the nature of the primary there, they can vote if they hadn't voted in the Democratic primary a few weeks ago. They can vote in this primary for Donald Trump or Nikki Haley. What are you seeing and hearing on the ground in terms of that effort to woo those Democratic voters towards the Republican Party?
Not much movement in that direction.
Well, there it is.
There will be some. South Carolina is an interesting state. It's a very small state. Have four distinct cultures in this state, which is one of the reasons the Democrats made South Carolina one of the early states. So these personal relationships, you do not register by party, but the personal relationship will yield some kind of cross-party voting. But for a movement to take place in that direction, nothing like that is going to happen. So there'll be a few votes from Democrats for one or the other. But I would assume more of those votes would be for Nikki Haley than Donald Trump, despite what was said by the Republicans here this morning.
Congressman, I'm not sure if you've heard some of the pitch that the former president is making to black voters. Let me read you just a little bit of what he said. Quote, "I got indicted a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And a lot of people said that that's why the black people like me, because they've been hurt so badly and discriminated against. And they actually viewed me as I'm being discriminated against," he said. And then this morning, as we were on air, there was a statement from the Biden-Harris team, from their black media director, Jasmine Harris, who says this: "The audacity of Donald Trump to speak to a room full of black voters during Black History Month as if he isn't the proud poster boy for modern racism. This is the same man who falsely accused the Central Park Five, questioned George Floyd's humanity, compared his own impeachment trial to being lynched, and ensured the unemployment gap for black workers spiked during his presidency." When he is out there repeating lies about his record on black unemployment, his record on any number of issues, how do Democrats come out and really undercut that?
Well, they won't. I think Democrats know that record very well, and to the extent that some of them may be forgetting it, I am highlighting that record every chance I get. Not just the Central Park Five, but the way he insulted time and time again Barack Obama, the first African-American president in these United States. Him, the way he insulted his own African-American female staffer, Omarosa, when he looked in the camera and referred to her as a dog. I'm not going to let anybody in the black community, anybody in the country for that matter, forget that. And if he thinks for one moment that he can be condescending in front of a mic here in South Carolina, after having laid out that kind of a record going into this election, he's got another thought coming. And we are just waiting for the Republicans to finish whatever it is they're doing. And we are going to go into this general election in a way that no one has ever seen before. He is not going to run away from that record. It is there and it's clear.
Congressman, can we talk about the general election then for just a moment? Because I take all of your points about Donald Trump's record as it relates to black people while he was president. But there are, and I know that the Biden campaign has made a lot of investments in ads and whatnot, record investments, frankly, and they do have a record to run on. But when you go into spaces and places across the country, like the Detroit or the suburbs of Detroit, in Atlanta, the suburbs of Atlanta, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the suburbs of Milwaukee, there is some hesitation yet. So what the ads are one thing, but what else is the campaign infrastructure planning to do to really, turn out the vote, to earn folks' vote, particularly black voters, young black people, when it comes to this November?
Well, I've made no secret of my hope that we will mobilize the biggest group of validators that we have ever had, simply because we are going to have to contend with this AI stuff. You all been reporting on it. They are very effective or efficient with it. We got to make sure that they are effective with it. So we are going to have boots on the ground, people doing what I call hand-to-hand combat on the ground in this election, because we are going to be challenged significantly with the misinformation that's going out, and there's not much we can do about that. At least I can't. But I do know that when you go one-on-one with people and you confront them in their communities where they are, you get a much better response than trying to fight off the misinformation that's out there over the airwaves.
Congressman, I want to shift a little bit from the politics of campaigning to the politics of running the government. We have deadlines coming up very, very shortly regarding the nation's budget. We got a March 1st, a March 8th deadline to figure out exactly what our budget's going to be. Republicans right now are, some reporting, not even planning to come back to Washington. There is some talk about just staying out until a plan is put on the table by the administration, one that they like. What are you hearing? What do you expect? Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is very adamant at this point about the move rests with Democrats in the White House. Yet they don't seem necessarily interested in putting anything from their perspective on the table as well. How are you seeing things right now, and are we headed for a shutdown?
Well, I sure hope we won't have a shutdown. I cannot get into the head of our speaker. I know this. There is a plan on the table, accepted by more than 70 members of the Senate. A significant portion of them are Republicans. The president has endorsed that plan. If you got 70% of the Senate and 100% of the White House in support of a plan, what is the speaker talking about? This makes no sense. And I think the American people are beginning to see that this speaker is a part of what I call groupies of Putin. That's what GOP stands for now. Groupies of Putin. And they are doing Putin's business at the behest of the former president. And that, to me, the American people will see through that. And we Democrats are going to do what we can to make sure that it's front and center. If this government shuts down and people don't get their Social Security check, their retirement checks, and people are laid off from work, they are going to have this laid right at the doorstep of the Republican Party, and we are not going to back up from that one bit.
Well, Congressman, to your point about Russia, one of the big stories this week was that the informant at the heart of the Republicans' sham impeachment against President Biden, it seems may have been a Russian asset. I want you to take a listen to what Republican Representative Ken Buck had to say about that.
We were warned at the time that we received the document outlining this witness's testimony. We were warned that the credibility of this statement was not known. And yet people, my colleagues, went out and talked to the public about how this was credible and how it was damning and how it proved President Biden's, at the time, Vice President Biden's complicity in receiving bribes. It appears to absolutely be false and to really undercut the nature of the charges.
Congressman, they were warned about Smirnov's credibility. They ginned him up as this big witness. Now, all of a sudden, that this is out in the public, Comer trying to downplay the importance of Smirnov as a witness, saying he has other evidence. I just got to know, have you seen any of that evidence that he claims to have?
Absolutely not. It has never been in it. Jamie Raskins, ranking member Raskins, has been sounding the alarm on this for a long time. The Democrats on the Government Ops Committee are doing a great deal of work, staying focused on this, talking with people who got the information. They've got this information. They know this stuff is not true. But is as conservative as one can be. I admire and respect him. He is what I call a genuine patriot. He will not allow this country to be co-opted by the groupies of Putin, and that's what's going on here. And I think that it's time for the American people to wake up and see exactly what's happening in this country. Now, y'all been talking about this morning. I've been talking about it for some time now, that we have got to see that the former president is a tool of Russia. We've got to see what happened when he was president and what they were trying to do with Joe Biden and his family way back in Ukraine a long time ago, that led to the firing of the ambassador, to the undercutting of those people who are there to do our country's biddings in Ukraine. These people have an agenda that's not good for the future of this country, and voters have got to do what is necessary to protect this democracy. This is the greatest country on earth. We have got to keep working together to make this a better country, which will never be perfect, but it's the best thing going, and we should not allow anybody to undercut that and keep us from becoming a more perfect union.
Well, I can say one thing real quick, Mr. Congressman, before you go. I am so glad I am not the chairman of the groupies of Putin. That's all I have to say, bro. Thank you very much for that.